Do you think हिंदू खतरे में है?
Yes, we are all Indians.
नहीं, लेकिन कागज दिखाना पड़ेगा ना.
कागज दिखाएंगे.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Charcha with the Chachas. Prashant, say hello.
Hello.
So, guys, today we have another great guest with us. We have brother Shihab Khan, who's going to be a doctor soon enough. He is pursuing his PhD from IIT Bombay in affiliation with Monash University in Australia, and he's also associated with Asia's largest Islamic ideologic student organization, that is SIO of India. So, thank you so much, Shihab, for joining us on this episode of Charcha with the Chachas. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here.
So, let's get straight into it. So, Shaib, the first thing I want to ask about is about this UAPA situation of Umar Khalid and Dr. Kafil Khan under NSA. So, what do you think? It is just because their name is such that these allegations and these things are being put on them just because their name is of certain community?
Yeah, well, name makes a lot of difference. That's also true. But if you see in our country, and even globally, there has always been the good Muslim
Yeah.
as opposed to the bad Muslim, right? And if you look at Umar and Dr. Kafil, they check all the boxes of any good Muslim. They are
Okay.
so Umar, for example, is he's very liberal. He is very secular. He is also a self-proclaimed atheist. Most likely, his Muslim identity is only cultural.
Yeah.
So he checks all the boxes of any good Muslim, right? And same thing with Dr. Kafil Khan. So first of all, this shatters the traditional good Muslim binary and the bad Muslim binary that we have had for a very, very long time. And what this kind of tells you is that the only good Muslim is the Muslim without a tongue. As long as you have a tongue and you are talking, doesn't matter, and you're talking about rights, especially, you're a problem and you will be looked at with the same lens as any other Muslim. These guys they don't wear any beard per se, na to dadi rakhe na to topi rakhe hue hain, and probably they don't pray that often. And I'm not saying this as some kind of a negative thing on them, but that's just probably their lifestyle, right? If you listen to them, but even they're not good enough Muslims, so it's really really unfortunate, and I'm very disappointed because that's not the kind of India that I have been dreaming about, that I have been trying to represent, in countries outside of India, like Europe, like Australia. That's a very disturbing experience for me per se.
Going from there, do you think हिंदू खतरे में है?
Yes, definitely, and I think sab khatre mein, Muslims khatre mein, Hindu khatre mein, because if you're living under such a regime, your civil rights are not very protected.
Yep.
You know, see, the thing is, nafrat jo hai na, nafrat, hatred, it's blind. वो अंधी होती है. Why is it blind? Because it doesn't know where to stop, right?
It will engulf
So
you.
it will engulf everybody around, because there are immediate political dividends, right, of such kind of a language, such
Yeah.
kind of a vilification. So it's not just Umar Khalid. It began with Bhima Koregaon, and then Harsh Mandar. I mean, which state would be persecuting a guy with such credentials? Such credentials towards, or such credentials of commitment towards the nation, commitment towards the society as a whole. Who would persecute them? But again, Harshmander is not a Muslim, right? Because probably Muslims are a stepping stone in this Game of Thrones. So yeah, you are khatre mein. Sab khatre mein hai.
If you look at history, basically, okay, from the time when kings even reigned, okay, it's human in nature that whoever is in power, they have to show that they are in power by some method or the other. जब अपने पे आती है, people will do anything to protect their seat. Do you feel that that is also the case in today's time as well, in a democratic situation as well?
I don't really think so. Because अपने पे नहीं आई है कुछ भी, मतलब कुछ भी नहीं आई हुई है. We are
Correct.
doing all the right things as a country, At least we were doing all the right things maybe 10 years ago. Like we were trying to establish a due process of law. We were trying to get representation to all the people. We were focusing on our economy. We were trying to develop. We were trying to avoid any kind of a conflict within the country. We're trying to, and that's what a state is supposed to do, right? State is like parents, कि बच्चे हमेशा आपस में लड़ेंगे, but the thing is the role of a parent is to come there and be like, okay, let's not fight, okay? But then what happened? Why are we taking such an about turn? For a lot of people, chaos is a ladder. अगर आपने Game of Thrones देखा, this is a very iconic dialogue by Littlefinger where he says that chaos is a ladder.
Yep.
For some people,
Yep.
the only way to progress up is to destroy whatever has already been built up. That's the only way that they can progress.
But do you think this narrative has been do you think this narrative has been constructed just in the past 6 years, or there has been a build-up of sorts leading to this moment in which we are living in?
There definitely has been a build-up. For example, look at 1857, right? The British, at least the East India Company, has occupied India. Okay, they are ruling with their iron fist. They are torturing our agriculturists. What happens? Hindus and Muslims come together, right? They come together, and they come under the banner of the last Mughal king of that time, which is a Muslim king, Bahadur Shah Zafar. From that kind of a situation, where a Mughal is projected as the de facto face of the Indian subcontinent, to a situation like today, where Kangana is saying some XYZ stuff about Babar ki army and stuff. So there has definitely been things have definitely changed, right?
Sure.
And yes, the roots of this definitely go back to history, and I can talk about it and what I think they are. And they
Do you
definitely go
think
back-
at the time of Babur and at the time of Akbar, the main agenda or the main motive of these emperors who came or who invaded India was to convert the Hindus or was to convert the native Indians into Muslims?
No, not
And do
really.
you think there is a need? Okay, fine. Okay, I want to join another question with it.
Yeah.
Is if in case they did, in case if somehow Babur really wanted to convert them, do you think there is a need for Indian Muslims today to defend what Babur did in those times, or to just move on and let people know that they are not, that today's Muslims are not here to convert India into a Muslim country? So let's go to the part one of the question, which was: do you think Babur and all these emperors came to convert India into into a Muslim country?
Yeah, so right now we have a very famous self-authored autobiography of Babur, which is called Babarnama.
Okay.
And William Dalrymple, is the famous British historian, is going to publish a book very, very soon on Babur's Babarnama.
Right.
He was probably happy living in Afghanistan, right? But Rana Sanga se jab invitation gaya ki, you should come here, defeat this guy, these Rajputs, and their own brethren, Rana Sanga was
Right.
also a Rajput. It's not going to
Okay.
work out. We need you here, And he came
Right.
here, and he came as a conqueror, and he ruled as a conqueror, right? But those were medieval times. Everybody
True,
was
true.
invading everywhere.
Yeah.
There were no borders, right? The Marathas, for example, invaded Bengal,
Yeah.
Okay.
and
yeah.
Bengalis don't have a very happy memory of it. So
Okay.
everybody, the Chandeli Raj, jaise ki I come from a region which is called Bundelkhand, and my parents are from a city called Mahoba. So we have a very famous, folk legend which is called Alha, which is essentially about three different Rajput, uh, uh, kingdoms basically fighting each other, and again Ala and Udal, they are the heroes in it. So they're fighting Prithviraj Chauhan and they're defeating it. So they were all invaders. Everybody was invading everyone. And
Right.
how did now so now that becomes the question that how did Islam spread in India? Okay. And I don't think a question like this should be solved by WhatsApp forwards.
Yeah.
That's
true.
because
Nothing
see,
should
the
be
thing
solved
is
by
I'm
WhatsApp forwards.
nothing should be, yeah, exactly, unless it's cute baby videos. I love cute baby videos, and I love cute dog videos.
And nothing
but
should be solved by Arnab Goswami as well. just to put it
if
out
he
there.
can, yeah. So yeah, so the thing is, a question like this, you probably need to go to the academics, right? What are they writing about? So how did then Islam spread in India? Now, one of the most proclaimed historians who has done the most formidable works in this domain is Richard Eaton. I think he's from University of Arizona, and he has written an entire book that the rise of Islam and the Bengal frontier.
Islam and the Bengal frontier.
Yeah, so now
Yeah.
that book is really, really amazing because he brings out a lot of data, a lot of archaeological data, a lot of written data, record data, and what he shows is that there was an inverse relationship to the spread of Islam and the political strength of Muslims. That there was an inverse relationships. So for example, why did most of the people who converted to Islam were from Western Punjab and East Bengal? Why? Because they were not the centers of Muslim power. This is Muslim power is a very wrong way to look at it. It was Turkic power, it was Afghani power, it was Persian power.
Yeah, there are
If
different
you
different
were
things.
to ask, yeah, exactly. If you were to ask Mughals, how exactly do you identify yourselves? They would say that we are Timurids. We are the lineage of Timur. They would not say that I am a Muslim. And we know this for a fact because
Right.
because it's written all over their architecture. It's written all over their their the things that they left us. So there was an inverse relationship.
Were the Timurids from Chaldia? Were they from the plains of Babylon? The Timurids? Or
No, they
somewhere
were
around there?
Uzbekis.
Uzbekis, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
okay.
yeah, Samarkand was the
So they were not
capital.
from Persia.
They were not from Persia, and they spoke They spoke Turkic language, but there were
Turkic
many,
language.
many different occasions where they got Persianized.
Right, right. The cross culture.
That yes, exactly. That's how it happens, right? So they became highly Persianized. They were Persianized Turks. So this is so. How do you explain this fact? And not only this, even if, for example, if you zoom in to a Suba of Bengal, right? There are certain cities where you have the concentration, which were the capital of Muslims, and
Okay.
if you look at the population of Muslims, it was least in those capital regions. It was always at some other regions. So so it's a whole different thing. How do you explain this fact then? That if this is
Right.
what's happening, and certain dynasties, like for example Mughals, they really, really tried to suppress religious conversions.
Okay.
And this is something that Richard Eaton talks about. Like for example, the Mughals, they took a very active and state policies to stop conversions. They did not want conversions happening because for them it was kind of a problem. Because they didn't want to integrate those particular families and particular castes into their fold. So they tried to, so there was this very famous case of a very famous Rajput warlord converting to, I'm forgetting the name, converting to Islam. And
Yes, that's
Akbar
what I
is this-
wanted to get to because we see a lot of Rajputs being a lot of intermarriage between the Rajputs and the Mughals, right? And this is where things get a lot dicey because when you say you were converted and then there are intermarriages because they were, of course, with consent. This is one of those paradoxes or one of these dicey areas, I feel.
Yeah, but no, because
Right?
it was about power. Like you intermarried because you needed that land, you needed that power, you needed good relations with that other land. That's why you intermarried with their kid or with their things. That's why, you know, sometimes they had something that you don't. That is we think globalization is a new thing, but actually it is has been a age old phenomena, because one country.
Capitalism, globalization, everything.
Yeah,
They have
we
been
think.
there throughout these ages.
Yeah, but in those days it was more brutal. बस की है ना, गला काट के चले जाते थे. It was very simple. There was no social media as such. Instead of talwar, now we have keyboards. That's the only difference that has changed in today's times. It's almost the same thing. Every nation, no nation is, you know, complete in their own respect. Every nation needs something from the other. So you give something in order to gain something. So sometimes it had to be relations. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how the Europeans are working, right? I mean, they're trying to integrate themselves into a much larger European Union.
Yeah.
They are enshrining multiculturalism in their constitution, that, you know, we are a multicultural country. And look at us, we're probably still living in the past. So yeah, so this has always been the case. And the Rajput thing that you mentioned is actually very, very interesting, because this begets the question that who exactly was the ruler, right? So for example, and this is actually a British implant into India, right? So the thing is, the Britishers gave us a lot of things. So one of the biggest things that they gave us was how to think.
Right.
Okay, they were not here just to rule, and this is why the Mughals were very, very different from, or any other ruling dynasty, was very different from the British, because they were not exporting stuff outside. They made this their home. You know, it was a part of them. It
Right,
was
right.
They were
They set up
speaking
home. They
our
set up
language.
camp here.
They set up camp here. They were speaking our language. Akbar was
Right.
issuing gold coins with Sri Ram on it, right? And it's not just Akbar. The percentage of Brahmins in the Mughal court skyrocketed in the times of Aurangzeb.
Yeah.
You know, so for them it was a very different thing. And what they were trying to do is, and you can find this in
But the problem is the historians and researchers who come up with these evidences, right, and who come up with these researches, they are more than often termed as anti-nationalist. It's interesting that you mentioned archaeological evidence, because the moment we had a judgment about the Ram Mandir, the Mandir in Ayodhya, the ASI's evidences were directly ignored, and a conclusion was reached that whatever was beneath the masjid was a temple, that the masjid was built on a temple. But the evidence shows you that there was already a masjid there, or there were Buddhist stupas there, right?
and there were
So
graveyards
how do we
that
see
came out.
graveyards that
There
came
were
about?
sacrifices. There were probably areas where animal sacrifices happened because of the animal bones that
Yes,
came out.
yes. And it's so complicated because Buddhism today is not what Buddhism was years ago, or decades or centuries ago. It's changed a lot. Hinduism is not today what it was
Every
100 years ago.
Every religion.
Right? Every religion. Most of these religions have evolved, and hence it becomes so difficult for people to understand or grasp what exactly happened so many years ago. And unless we do not have an open debate, open discussion, or open research and open-ended research, open-ended dialogue about this, then we'll always be narrow-minded. Oh yes, the Mughals came to conquer, the Mughals killed, and today's Muslims also are here to conquer. They are also here to conquer and make India a Muslim country. What do you have to say about this comparison? Because the whole goal of us talking about the history, the Muslim history in India, was to reach to this, because people convert Babar ki Sena, just like you told, Babar ki Sena, and somebody is trying to change all these names from Allahabad to Prayagraj by saying that, oh, we were bound culturally, we were bound in this, we are still bound by all these names. So what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, so see, the thing is, first of all, there is no comparison between Indian Muslims and Babar. Babar was an Uzbeki. He was a medieval. I am an Indian. Indian Muslims are Indian, right?
Yeah.
We have.
But
Indian
didn't you
parents.
convert?
We have Indian parents. Everybody converts at some point or the other. Everybody converts. In the sense that, what's the guarantee that my children will be Muslims
Yeah.
from today onwards? And what if they decided that, okay, I don't want to be a Muslim, I want to be an atheist, or I want to be a Christian? So am I going to blame maybe? Uh, will let's say imagine that all of the Muslims they converted to Christianity, right? Let's just imagine an Indian Muslim converting to Christianity. Imagine the scenario that 100 or 200 years from today, some guys coming along and saying like कि USA तुम्हारी वजह से हुआ, USA you are this, or Europeans you converted to Christianity. See, the thing is, conversion is not a big deal. It's not a big deal. It's a lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
It's not a big deal in the sense that we cannot govern how people connect to the divine.
No, this is no longer a question of divinity and no longer a question of how you relate to the divine. This is a question of if you convert from Hinduism back to Christianity or a Muslim, another religion, then you're going against your dharma, you're going against the land. You're going against the sentiment of the land you live in.
Yeah, because the question is that of nationalism, right?
Nationalism.
So because see, the thing is, Britishers did a lot of things here, right? After in 1857, and one of the things that they imported to us was nationalism. Now, Europe was still transitioning into a nation state. It was not yet a nation state. So there were many theories. For example, if you look at the reunification of Germany under Otto and Bismarck, right? It was a very violent process. It was a very violent process in which one language, one culture, one identity,
Right.
and all these things were imposed upon a very diverse set of people. Now, what happened is those ideas have stuck around. Not only so those ideas have stuck around in the minds of Hindus and Muslims, but Europe is moving away from it.
Right.
Right? Why is Europe
point.
moving away from it? Because they had academic freedom. They were able to engage with their history in a more
And they have made the mistakes and they are learning from it.
they
Example,
are
Second
learning
World
from
War.
their mistakes. Exactly, 100%. Human beings. I am a scientist, right? When I was in France, I was working for so my research was for a French company,
Yeah.
whose research division was headed by an Italian guy, and I was supervised by a Greek professor, and I was working closely with his Spanish, PhD student, and I'm an Indian guy, right? So how do
You are very particular about the ethnicity.
the power of human beings coming together and working
Yeah.
is really, really remarkable. Who is an Indian? Whoever wants to be an Indian. We are all Indians.
नहीं लेकिन
You go
कागज दिखाना
abroad.
पड़ेगा ना.
कागज दिखाएंगे कागज देख के कैसे कोई हिंदुस्तानी उसका सबूत कर
Yeah.
सकता है
Like have you read this which is the book Yuval Noah Harari's recent book?
yeah. Oh, sorry, no. I read his Sapiens,
Yes,
not
not
the
21st century, 21 lessons for the 21st century. Yeah.
21st
So
century. Yes.
in that he quotes a very simple sentence. He says that a country is a piece of land. If you hit that piece of land, there is nothing going to happen to the piece of land. You're going to hurt your hand. Okay, there are no sentiments in the piece of land. Okay, it's just soil. It's just soil. But
Yeah.
if you hit a countryman, okay, if you hit a person in that country, okay, you will hurt that person. That person will get hurt, and that person will scream and shout. That person has sentiments. That person has feelings. Okay. Now the problem is the state has told us that we have to work for the country. Okay, that we have to do something for them. Only then the country is going to. Which is I don't disagree with it. If we do something for the country, that will go. But the state which is put in place by us, by the people of India, they have to work for us. It's not the other way around. We have put them in place so that they work for us. That's why we pay taxes. We pay the amount of money that they tell us to, so that they are working for us, and not the other way around, that we are not working for them or the country. We should be working as a unit. Okay, we should be working as a unit. Now, state, just to cover up its defense, cover up its frailties and everything, they bring up this argument that अगर तुमने हमारे अगेंस्ट कुछ बोल दिया तो तुम एंटी नेशनल हो, तो तुम इस देश के लिए कुछ करना नहीं चाहते. वेर इन देश अभी देश को मार के कुछ नहीं होगा. देश को मार के कुछ नहीं होगा, देशवासियों को मार के तुम सबको मार सकते हो. So that's a very simple point that you will said that you can't hit a piece of land but you can hit the countrymen. So because nobody is different, someone just drew a piece of line, and that was India, that was India's border. Pakistan beach mein se kaata hai. There is no sense in how Pakistan was made. Punjab ke beach mein se leke gaye wo log. Lahore was Punjab, Sindh was Punjab. Sindh was a different region, but there were mostly Punjabis around there. There is no reason how Pakistan was created. It's just someone just drew a line in between. Okay, so you can.
And this is yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, please complete.
No,
So actually, this reminded me of what Maulana Azad said, that when he was criticizing the Muslim League, that you're talking about partition. It's not going to work out because the geography is not conducive, and nations and countries are not made by this. For example, in Lahore, you had a Sikh majority.
Yes.
In Amritsar, you had a Muslim majority.
Correct.
How on earth are you going to draw a line, right? And the trauma that so again, the thing is now, it all comes back to the point that we have not really been honest about our history.
Absolutely.
We should have had at least 4 or 5 partition memorials in India. Let people watch it. Let people re-experience and relive the tragedies that people went through. Now what happens is, you have a population, okay, 65% of India is less than 35 years of age, right? So this population has been born in after 85. It has no memory of the havoc that we have experienced, because of religion. Because of religious conflicts going unmanageable.
Yeah.
Right. So had we been honest with our history and with our own reality, we would have realized that things are more complicated.
And Twitter is not history. You can't read history in 280 characters.
Especially from Angel Priya. Don't trust Angel Priya, bro.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, when people say that a lot of history in our schools is leftist, is very leftist. It's only about Mughals. It's only about Babur. It's Akbar and all the Mughal dynasties, basically. But the problem is also there. Yes, there should be more Indian, the Marathas is also a lot of there in our history books as well. But there should be different leaders. There should be kings from the south as well. There should be kings from the west of India. There should be kings from so many different regions and not just one particular region, because Delhi is only considered the capital of India. During the post-modern era, before the Britishers came in and after as well. But the actual thing is, in that time before independence or before the Britishers came in, Delhi was completely a separate region. Because we say north of India, it's completely a separate region, and the south of India from Karnataka, Telangana, Tipu Sultan's area, it's a very different region. So right now it's just a map, and we think that this is only this is one country, and we see it as one. But it's so many different states. Every state had their own kings, kingships, kingdoms, and different ideologies, cultures, and so many other things. And when people say तुम हमारी सभ्यता को नहीं जानते, मैं बोला तू इधर 70 साल से मुश्किल से. You are here only for 70 years. You are not seen half of the things that are there. You have not reading half of the things that are there. So just if you immerse yourself, you will not come up with this bullshit that तुम सभ्यता के against जा रहे हो, क्योंकि तुमने ही सभ्यता नहीं देखी पहली बार. If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And see, that's the whole idea, right? That was the idea that everybody was sold to, right? When India was being created, that what was that idea? And unity in diversity.
Yeah.
Like, diversity is not an impediment. Everybody knows this. Even Europeans knows this. Again, that's why I'm coming back to them, because there's a lot of
things to learn.
Think that that Europeans are doing this, so must be correct. But that's probably true. That unity in diversity, and that's the kind of India that. So, for example, and that's why. So when I was in Europe, I would tell my European colleagues that you guys have no idea about diversity. As an Indian guy, the diversity that I experience every single day, you would have not experienced it maybe in your lifetime. So yeah, it takes effort. And again, what happens is, when you prejudice the mind of people. So for example, Abhik Banda hai, he is right now at zero. Now, the only exposure that he has had of Islam and Muslims is through Arnab Goswami, or maybe WhatsApp and stuff like that. So he's no longer at zero. He is at minus 100.
Yeah.
Now, when a Muslim actually comes along, a Muslim guy, and there are kinds of Muslims. Muslims are not a monolithic block. So when one kind of a Muslim comes along, that person is trying to put him in a box, which he understands, right? So from minus 100, that person first has to come to zero, and then only they will be able to have a unbiased, unprejudiced conversation about whatever ethnicity you're kind of engaging with. And this is the whole problem, that 4G technology and such machinery, it has already done a lot of damage.
Many people, many Muslims who are not, basically, you can say it on the below the poverty line, you can say, or below a certain line, they do not allow their kids, if especially if they are women, they do not allow them to pursue a further study. They do not allow them to sometimes not go into even complete their 10th or 12th standard education. And if even if they do so, even if they're super brilliant, they tend to keep them in their houses, just say because they're not good enough. That's also one thing that I've seen. If you don't mind, why do you think is that as well?
So first of all, I will never, I cannot accept the underlying premise of this question. There are 180 million, I think, so Muslims in India,
Yeah.
and they cannot be reduced to the personal experiences of one person or the second person or the third person. So, for example, my father would tell me that, beta, ilm jo hai na, it's divine. अब वो इल्म जो है वो चाहे किसी भी चीज का इल्म हो, चाहे even if you're studying science, or if you're trying to study about
Medicine.
some medicine, or even something. It's because ilm is usually used, this word is usually used for religious studies, the knowledge
Depth.
of the scripture and the text. What he would tell me, that that knowledge is divine, find it, and there is a very famous quote of Prophet Muhammad which is used, that, so I don't know how authentic this is, but it's used very often, which is that even if you find knowledge in China, then go to China. And that was the farthest thing that the Arabs could imagine in those times,
Right.
So now, so the point that I was trying to make is that there is a variety of experience. So I cannot judge a Muslim coming from Western UP with that of a Malayali Muslim, because they're totally different. Malayali Muslims are the most educated, one of the most educated, and the most well-off Muslim
Malayali
communities.
everything is too educated for some reason.
Yeah.
The
So now,
rickshawalas carry a doctorate degree. That's one of the jokes that was roaming around. So
One
yeah,
thing
I need
so,
citizenship
I
of
just want to
Malayali. Yeah.
I just want to intersect.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah,
have
yeah.
said that the Malayali Muslims are very very educated, and I was just going through some sources, and they say that the mostly Muslim majority area, the most Muslim majority area in Kerala, which is, I suppose you know, it's Malappuram,
Yeah.
right? And what I have gathered is Malappuram has a Sharia court, and
Yeah.
literacy is at its lowest in Malappuram, and education and marriage, teenage marriages also take place in Malappuram. So how do, when there is such a situation, a prevailing situation, apparent situation where people can see, right? How can we draw the line between them and the others?
See, the thing is, I don't really know where exactly are you quoting from, and lowest as compared to what. If you're talking about Malappuram district relative to other Kerala districts, that kind of makes sense, because there was an educational lag. And Omar Khalidi, in his book, Indian Muslims in the Indian economy, he hinted this fact, that there was a huge lag because of historical reasons in the education of Muslim communities in within Malap, uh, lag between the Muslim and the non-Muslim communities in Kerala. So that's why if you look at any of the social indicators, the Muslims, Malayali Muslims, even though they are much better off than Bihari Muslim or UP Muslims, they are still a bit less as compared to the other communities of Kerala. So this is definitely one fact. Now, what has happened with those guys is that there has been a Gulf boom in the 70s and 80s, and that is what really took off the Malayali Muslim community. So after that, you have a lot of institutional development of education institutions and all. So that's a very, very recent phenomenon. We are still
Right.
hoping. So, for example,
Right.
if you look at the women's fertility rates of Malayali Muslims in the 90s and that of 2010, there's a huge difference.
True.
Now, when a woman has less children, that's usually an indicator that she is more educated, she is more qualified,
True.
and the medical facilities of the community have increased, so they are experiencing less infant mortality rates.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. So that's kind of the case. So we need to
Right.
understand each problem's communities to itself. But
Right.
is there something in the religion that the Malayali Muslims are following that is making them backward? Or, now this hypothesis doesn't hold true.
True.
Because if it was about religion, if Islam was, see, the thing is, I'll tell you a fact. If Islam was keeping people backward, people would leave Islam in 1 minute. Because, God can wait. God can always, that's the de facto motto of how people engage with their religion. God can always wait, but Naukri cannot wait.
True.
Then why is the reason? I understand that, and that's so true what you're saying, because I also wanted to add a point here, but I'll ignore it for the sake of this conversation. And then why is it a prevalent case or apparent that Muslims have the lowest literacy? This has always startled me, because some people say that Muslims have been favored a lot, right? They have been given, they have been pampered a lot. My question is, if they have been pampered a lot, if all these governments, if they have been played around by all these political parties by offering them some, then why are they so low on the literacy parameter, also low on the workers population parameter? Why is this case? In India, specific to India, not all around the world.
Interesting question, and that was one of the reasons. So that is one of the questions that I've tried to engage with very, very strongly. That I've read many books and academic research papers and many things for it. And the reason why, if you look at Muslims, they are among one of the most on an average. That's what we should say. On an average, they're one of the most marginalized and most backward communities of India, is because they have always been backward. See, this shatters the myth that Muslims were ruling of India. It was not Muslims who were ruling India. Because if Muslims were ruling India, then why are all the Muslims so backward? Not just in the Indian subcontinent. Even if you look at the human development indices of Pakistan and Punjab, that region, and the Bangladesh, even though Bangladesh is making a lot of progress, they're pathetic. Why is that? Because if Muslims were ruling, then they should have been, showering money on Muslims. But the fact is that some military aristocracies who were mostly initially there were Turkic and Persian and Afghan, and then they became completely Indianized. They were ruling. And Muslims, like every other community in the subcontinent, has been poor forever. Dalits have been poor forever. The STs have been poor forever. The OBCs have been poor forever. But what has happened is, after 1975, after 1947, right? So when our country was created, there was this very big aspiration of Nehruvian socialism, right? And this is what Maulana Azad referred to in one of his critiques, again, of the Pakistani national movement, that you are talking about being threatened from the Hindus. Your threat is actually poverty. And what is your plan? And this is one of the critiques that he gave. And he said that, if you are in India, then we are coming up with this ideology that we want to bring these communities forward, which is, and on this aspect, Muslims are no different than from Hindus, so why can't a poor Muslim and a poor Hindu come together and jointly take this effort? Now, so this was the aspiration of 1947, but there were limits to the socialism that Nehru implemented, right? So what happened? There were more targeted efforts. So targeted efforts were made for SC/STs, right? OBCs had the Mandal Commission, even though that was very politicized and stuff. So there were targeted measures to uplift certain backward section. Because see, the thing is, inequality in India is highly correlated with the caste that you have. Okay,
Yes.
so even if you go to Muslims, you will find that the certain topmost, even though Islam theoretically does not have any caste, but Indian Muslims do, the topmost people, the topmost communities and the castes within the Indian Muslims themselves, they are well off. But
Yeah,
most of them, which is,
yeah, that's what
yeah,
I
so
feel.
they're quite backward.
Yeah.
So the point that I was trying to get to is that that targeted affirmative action for Muslims never really happened, and one of the reasons why it never really happened is because of this whole narrative that Muslims are being appeased. What appeasement are you talking about? Hajj subsidy is not for Muslims. Who said so? Muslims suffer because of Hajj subsidy. That Hajj subsidy was for Air India. And because of that, Muslims were forced to take a ticket in Air India to go to Hajj and all these different things. We are much better off after Hajj subsidy. Hajj travel has become cheaper after Hajj subsidy. So see, the thing is, this appeasement narrative, the theory and the reality is very, very different. And the final point that I want to talk about in this particular reason is
Context.
that, see, context is that, see, India, all Indians are equal.
Yeah.
This is not the reality. This is an aspiration.
Right.
That can't be possible
We
as well,
want a
right?
country.
Like that's an aspiration that every country has, but it can't be possible on some level, because if somebody is rich, there has to be someone poor. If I have 500 rupees, say, and the other one has 1,000 rupees, but if I make 1,500, the other one is behind me and the other one becomes poorer. So always the middle class, the economy would run according to the middle class person, and someone would be left out poor. There cannot be an equality in things, when it comes to money, and comes to socio economic things. Because if you look at it, even in our religious texts, it's said that if someone will always be poor, it is just a matter of fact. It is just
It's a natural law.
it is law. Like, there has to be a loser. Okay, the government does try that no one should be hungry in a system, but in US as well, homeless people are there. गरीब वहाँ पे भी है. ऐसा नहीं है कि US and Sweden are the most. Sweden also has so much money, and China has so much money, but there are poor people in the biggest developed countries in the world. There are homeless people, there are people without jobs. So it is very hard. But also one small thing I noticed, that in Muslims there is one thing: either they are below poverty line or they are super rich. There are only these two. There is very hardly people who are they come in the middle bracket. Either they are very well off, or they come
Yeah.
they live in chawls, and they have a
Yes, sure.
so there is
Sure. Because I was studying
yeah.
about this. That the upward mobility rate of the Muslims, okay, is very, very low. So they do not move from the lower category or from the middle category to the higher categories, higher classes.
But if they do, they'll straight away move
to
up to the main highest class. Is what I've seen basically. Yeah.
Yeah, so the thing is, yeah, upward mobility is definitely low. And that's, again, the reason is because there has never been a targeted affirmative action for Muslims to begin
Do
with.
the Muslims need a targeted affirmative action from the government?
I don't know if they can uplift so many people living below poverty line without a targeted action. You can go ahead. I'll be more than happy. But it has never really worked in the Indian context. That's the unfortunate reality. 70
No,
years
what I'm saying
70
is,
years of Indian independence, and you see the most meaningful changes happening within the Dalit community after 2008. Why? Because that's when the reservations, the Mandal Commission was actually implemented, and that increased the SC/ST reservation as well. So I'm not. So I don't really believe in this. So I'm not really saying that we should have reservations and stuff. Right? What
no,
I'm
because
trying to
why
get
I'm
to
asking this
is,
is because it's been
yeah.
70 years. It's been almost 2 generations, right? And all these parties have been, excuse me, and all these parties have been playing with us or playing with you, playing with the Muslims, so to say. So why cannot Muslims stand up for themselves, for the development of themselves? Or what is the issue? What
Yeah.
exactly? Is there a requirement? Is there a need for a reformation in the Indian Muslim community?
Uh, you've raised an excellent point. Now, see what happened is the package of partition was too much for Muslims to carry. Okay. Now, let me substantiate my point. After the partition, in 1950, I think so, there was uh, an all India Muslim kind of a conference in which Maulana Azad came, and Maulana Hazrat Mohani, who was earlier a part of Muslim League but he stayed in India, he also came. And the formula which Maulana Azad gave Indian Muslims was that they should shun all kinds of identity politics. They should completely, because the baggage of partition. Now, if any Muslim comes along, and this
Right.
happens till today, talking about their rights, people start saying, "Arey, isko to dusra Pakistan chahiye."
Right.
Yep.
So what has happened is the imagination of the people has failed.
Like
Right.
if
Any
yeah.
Muslim attempt for an identity politics, for
Pakistan Chale Jao is the
articulating,
first thing that comes in.
yeah, exactly. Oh, really? You want to do identity politics? This is how Jinnah began. So that's the kind of narrative that has built. So what Muslims ended up doing, and this is true not for the South Indian Muslims, but mostly for the North Indian Muslims, is that they outsource their politics to parties which claim to be secular. So, for
Right.
example, Congress. And the reason why they did it, because they wanted to prove themselves, that okay, man, we are not communal, you know. So we will vote for. We are voting for you. We are voting for Hindu politicians. How can you call us communal? And
Right.
we are open to alliances with other different communities. But what happened is, again, the thing is, this cannot be underestimated. The socialism that initially came, that was propounded by Nehru, and then to a certain extent Indira Gandhi, that socialism that cuts across, caste, and that cuts across caste lines, and works on class lines, that never really took off until and unless those communities did identity politics, and they got targeted action. And this is a split that is still existing within the
Yes.
Indian left. That the Ambedkarites criticize them for not really paying attention to the question of caste, whereas the left is like more theoretical and says that no, we cannot tolerate identity politics. So that's a very, very big reason.
That's true.
And not just that. See, the thing is, every year, see, when we took more than 60 years, I think 50 years, to have a separate Ministry of Minority Affairs in this country. Right there, so let's understand this. And the thing is, when, for example, when the Dr. Gupta Commission report came during the time of Indira Gandhi, and that report had clearly said, and this is, I think, in the late 70s, had clearly said that the neo-Buddhists, which are basically Ambedkarites, and the Muslims are the most backward communities. Indira Gandhi didn't allow that report to be tabled for another 10 years. And there are news reports that when she was asked that why should we not discuss this report in the parliament, she said that there's no point brooding over a dead body. So this question was, again, deliberately diluted. Now the thing is, can we come together and identify issues within communities
True.
and work with them? So, for example, women's issues are not really women's issues; it's everyone's issues.
True.
There are women, We are from them. They are us. So similarly, Dalits issues are not just Dalits issues. They are our issues. If there's a community within our country which is struggling with something, we need to get them back on their feet. It does not mean that we are appeasing them. On the contrary, we are trying to make our aspiration, we are trying to realize our aspiration that all Indians are equal, but equal in terms of at least the equality of opportunities. And you rightly mentioned that there is a dipole within Indian Muslims, that there is a very rich. So this is one of the reasons where Indian Muslims differ from Dalits, because if you look at the average statistics, the Indian Muslims are very similar to Dalits. But underneath those average is a wealthy, creamy layer of Indian Muslims, which is inexistent among Dalits. So
Right.
yeah, that's true. And we should also note that a lot of the most educated and wealthy Indian Muslims migrated.
Yeah.
That was
True,
also a very, very big
Of course, 100%.
shock.
Just because we have some, we fall short of time. We're falling short of time. I want to ask you some really interesting questions, and I want
Yeah.
to know your input on this in a few words. Of course, we cannot define everything, compass everything in a few words. But talking about laws, Sharia or Uniform Civil Code?
Now, my take on this is that the nationalism that I believe does not really uh, believe that uniformity will bring unity, right? So if you want to make Indian Muslims more patriotic, let's say somebody comes, you cannot do that by taking away their identity. You cannot
Okay.
ask the Sikh person to give up their identity symbols, and then and then suppose that they will become more patriotic. So that's what I believe in. But so when we come to the personal law thing, right? Indian Muslims have the Sharia courts are only operating in personal law, and theoretically they can be a very good thing for our already overstretched judicial system, because a lot of the countries are exploring into these alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, right?
True.
So, for example, you don't really have to, because a lot of the people don't have the money to go to court,
Yes.
True.
especially when they're poor. So you have these courts which can help families resolve their disputes and all these different things. I think it's a very good thing. I think it should continue, and I think they should be strengthened. But there are a lot of women's issues involved, and those issues need to be addressed. And I am, and this is one of the places where I come to the Muslim community, and I tell them, see that you need to take the initiative on these issues, because if you are not able to provide a viable alternative, then you are only falling short yourself. So for example, look at triple talaq. Bangladesh does not have triple talaq. Okay, it's outlawed. It's not even considered.
Okay.
And even Pakistan does not have triple talaq.
Okay.
Why do Indian Muslims have this? Why do Indian Muslims have this triple talaq?
Right.
And then again, why Malaysian Muslims do not have it? All these different things. So again, this is a very, very big question. But I think what has happened, and Dr. Ambedkar, in his book on the Pakistan or the partition of India, that book, he wrote about this, that there is a sense of identity paranoia within Indian Muslims,
Right.
that they feel that they are being encroached upon by the majority community in terms of their
complex.
identity. And yeah, it is there. And if we look at what's happening today, it's definitely true also, to a very large extent, where the Muslim identity is being associated with with terrorism, with Babar ki Aulad and all these different things.
Right.
But what has happened because of that paranoia is that they have not really been able to engage with their own religious texts
True. True.
in a way that other Muslim communities have been able to engage. So it goes both ways. So my message to this on this question would be also directed towards the Muslim community, that you need to come out of this
Evolve.
this mindset. And I wouldn't really say evolve, because it's a very loaded term, but I would say
Yeah.
that Look at
Micro
other Muslim
evolutions, of
communities.
course. Hmm.
Yeah, look at other Muslim communities. They're not betraying their religion by, engaging with the texts.
Right.
You know.
Hmm. Hmm. I
So
had
yeah.
some inputs to yours, but just for the lack of time, we'll because these are some things that are very thought provoking, right? Thought provoking at your end also, and thought provoking also for our listeners. So I'll just skip that, and the next thing I wanted to ask you is: there are Muslims in India who say that we ruled over you Hindus for 800 years, and we will do so again. There are some Muslims in India who say that you have destroyed Babar ka masjid, we will destroy your mandir again, and we will build a masjid
Yeah.
on that. Do you think this is
This
how we
is
will go on together, go on along?
See, the thing is, this is what happens where people are
Hatred.
afraid and paranoid. And I
Hmm.
think what's required here is for the state to come together and to outreach, to reach out, in that sense that, see, you are safe here. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, we are kind of falling short on communicating that. So
Communication. Yes,
now
yes, yes,
the thing
100%.
is, there will always be extremist elements
Hmm.
in every community.
Yes.
There are
Hmm.
extremists among the Americans and the Europeans. We have the white nationalists. We have what really kind, and there will always be extremist elements among XYZ different Muslim community as well. And what we really want is to make sure that they do not get the opportunity to come along and say, "Aha, we were right."
Hmm. True.
We want to prove them wrong.
Hmm.
That, see, you are wrong. There is not Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs and everybody, even though they do not belong to any religion, we can work together and live together in absolute peace and harmony. It's not a problem. If there are any conflicts, we can resolve them like mature adults. That's the kind of message that we want to communicate. And if there are any such extremist elements, we need to make sure that they do not get a stage, they do not get
A
audience, and they do
platform to
not
speak. Yeah.
power.
Hmm.
Yeah.
100%. A final question I would like to ask you, a second last, I would not say a final question, a semi
Yeah.
final question, is if you could tell us how the Muslim community has benefited after 2014 under the BJP government.
Has it?
Uh, yeah. So one of the things that Muslim community has benefited is that they have found a voice.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's because, see, the thing is, the traditional Muslim politician,
Hmm.
whether it be Mr. Salman Khurshid, and I have a lot of respect for him, or Mr.
Hmm.
Ghulam Nabi Azad, or if you have, let's say, for the lack of a better word, people from the orthodox, more conservative, for the lack of a better word, segments like Maulana Mahmood Madani, uh, you know, these people have no connect with the Muslim youth.
Hmm. Hmm.
They
Hmm.
just don't have any connection with the Muslim youth.
Hmm.
They have a twisted understanding and a very twisted understanding of history, and a very, the Muslim youth does not connect with them. To be short,
Hmm.
what has happened is the Muslim youth has found a voice,
Hmm.
and that voice was very much required. So I would thank the present government definitely for bringing Muslims out to the street for all the right reasons. You
Hmm.
know, yeah, civil liberties. Yes, that's one of the reasons why you should be on the streets, and not just when your own civil liberties are encroached, when it's any other segment from any other community in the country. So yeah, that has been a very good benefit. And and the other benefit is that the word Islamophobia has come to the national consciousness, and I
Hmm.
hope that it's able to develop. Words are very powerful. When you have uh, word to explain a phenomenon, it's really, really useful.
True.
So yeah, I think two things have been really good.
Yeah, true. But the thing that I also think is, um, any youth, okay, youths basically have friends in all domains, right? They have friends in Muslims, Christians, Sikhs. They have friends. Okay, but when you keep getting older, if you keep facing things, you keep experiencing things, you develop a persona. Okay, and you become rigid about a lot of things. Okay, rigid about things, and you are not ready to learn about some things, or about learn about new cultures, different people, different things, and you are set with a mindset that these things are going to, and that's what is different with the youth. That's why we have faith in the youth, that they will be the difference. They can be the difference makers and the priest protectors. But not just, if you just look at one side of the coin, we have to look at both sides of the coin, because we have been given that advantage over the previous generations, where they could only see one side. Okay, they could only see one side of spectrum, or one side, because here you have the option of reading or leaning. You don't need to lean on right or left, just lean on you towards humanity, is what we are trying to say. So that's why, when an older person, because all the political parties everywhere, it's an older person ruling that organization, right? And that everywhere there's a connect missing. Okay, there's a connect missing. And youths right now want peace. Nobody wants to fight with each other. वो गरम खून तो रहता है that they will fight among each other and just solve it tomorrow. But that's okay. But communal hate is something that is triggered, and something that the person in power is doing for their own benefits, is what we feel. So just want to ask you one last question.
And that was the message from, that was the summarization of a message from the Charcha with the Chichas podcast, is that we do not stand for any communal hate, any violence, no matter instigated by no matter who instigates it, right? So because a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye is not the solution for everything, right? I read on people's bios that the best way to answer a slap is not to show your cheek. So I don't understand. This is not the way that we are supposed, because we have evolved from all these things, our emotions,
Like,
and
if
our
you
ways of communicating with people. You're saying something?
Yeah, I was saying, if you slap in today's time as well, okay, that means you have not evolved yourself from the barbarians.
You have not evolved. You have not found a better way to communicate your dissent, to communicate your disagreement, to communicate your anger, and so we do not stand for anything. And with this final thing, I want to ask Shihab Khan his final message for Hindus and for Muslims, the youth alike.
Oh, that's too big of a thing to say, but I would like to just add, because the things that you were saying reminded me of Gandhi, and I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan because I studied his life, I studied his autobiography, and I studied the autobiography of Maulana Azad as well. What has happened is, that today's youth is growing up with a very faulty understanding of masculinity and manliness.
True.
Gandhi was
And
now
nationalism.
was Gandhi a macho man? Yeah, no, not really, right? I mean, that's the kind of. I mean, nobody would say that. Gandhi. I want to be. People want to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger, And why is that? Because Gandhi was an iconoclast. He was somebody who was, and of course, he had his own shortcomings.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that. If you remember that incidents from his life where he got on the train and that he sat on the section of the British people. So this British guy came along and he was like, how the hell can a India sit at my place, So he beat the shit out of Gandhi, He beat the shit out of Gandhi. And now that's not a very manly thing, right? You get beaten up by somebody who,
Right.
I mean, that's not the kind of heroes that we see. But you know what happened?
Right.
At the end of the day, Gandhi didn't budge. And that British guy, he went to the back, and Gandhi sat on that seat. He continued to sit. Now, who's the winner? So I would.
True.
So this is my message to everyone that think beyond.
True.
Don't let your WhatsApp or Netflix or anybody define what's right and wrong for you, or what should be the ideals that you should pursue in life. That's my message.
True.
So thank you so much, Shihab, for joining in this episode. A lot of a lot of fun things that we talked about, a lot of informative things, and different perspective and opinions that we found in this episode. It was a lot of fun, and Prashant as well. It was a very intriguing episode for us, and we enjoyed ourselves
100%,
to the core.
100%. We enjoyed ourselves. There was. I wanted to continue this conversation for longer,
Yeah.
but hopefully next time for sure.
Yeah.
God willing, we'll do this next time, and we'll
definitely.
go delve into deeper topics, deeper issues.
Hopefully, he
Thank
comes
you
on.
so much
Yeah.
for Eric and Prashant for having me here. It was really nice talking to you guys, and I hope that your podcast it really does a lot of such beneficial stuff for me.
Thank you so
very
much.
much.
Thanks so much. So, guys, that was it from this episode of Charcha with the Chichas. We were joined by Shihab Khan, and do follow us on our Instagram page, that's Charcha with the Chichas, and also on our Twitter page, that is CWC_pod. So, guys, until next Wednesday, that's it from me and Prashant. Charcha with the Chichas, your discussion adda.
That was cool. Cut. Thank you, Shihab. That was fun.